if not at every step of the way, but at least every month of the year. So today, Joanne and I will be dipping into our experience to give you, hopefully, some useful insights into writing. And then we'll invite you to ask questions via the chat room about issues that perplex you or about solutions to problems that you've worked out. So, Josie, why don't you begin?
Okay. Well, we promised to talk not so much around skills, this writing skills this evening, as uh, uh, rather to look at the kind of attitudes and things that either hold us back or the things we wish we'd known when we began writing. So the first thing I would like to say is don't write with anyone else on sitting on your shoulder, because I did that for years and years. It's the first one-way ticket into cringe, and then you you hamper yourself, and in the end you can't work because it's just too cringy. Write as if you're writing for yourself, the kind of thing that you yourself would like to read. Don't have that strict English teacher or your partner or the people that you admire sitting on your shoulder, um you know commenting, looking at what you're writing. Just throw them behind you, leave them. Write purely for yourself. When you start writing, write what you enjoy reading. That would be my first thing that I wish that I had sternly told myself when I began. Okay, Richard, go with, tell us
Okay,
the first thing you wish.
all right. I want to begin with a little sermon, um, or at least an informational, and that is I want to talk about the two phases of writing. Um, in fact, it's two phases involved in any act of creation, whether it's music, I would guess, or art, I would guess, but certainly with writing, I know. You begin with an idea, right? So that idea kind of come to you in any number of ways. Um, it could be just a feeling, it could be a sentence you've read, it could seem to have been transmitted from the realms beyond. I mean, ideas are mysterious. Writing ideas are particularly mysterious because quite often we can't trace their origins. So you get this idea and you dwell on it and you pummel it, and the idea starts to assume the shape of something that resembles a story. But it is still just an idea. And for me, what I wish I had known all those years ago, um, I wish I had known that this is the part of the writing process that you should pay a great deal more attention to than you generally do. This is before the so-called actual writing process begins, before you start putting words on the page or on the screen, which are intended to form part of the story. But what I've learned is that thinking about the story is writing, and dreaming about the story is writing. And the more you do of that in advance, I mean, it can be structured, it can be who are my characters, what are they like, what is their backstory. It can be that kind of structured thinking, but it can also just be playing with that idea and letting it drift across your mind and letting it suggest other ideas. So I should have put much more into this phase, because if you rush it and you put everything else in jeopardy, I think, because you assume that the idea that occurred to you on Tuesday morning as you were brushing your teeth was the best idea you're going to have. And so you stick with that idea and you develop that idea, but it's almost certainly not the best idea for that particular story. And the second thing, and I'm going to bunch these together, the second thing that I should have known all those years ago is that ideas are legion. I've got stories that I could tell about people who stuck with a single idea that wasn't working for year after year after year in the hopes that they could turn that pig's ear into a silk purse. And while that is sometimes possible, it is generally not. And then, of course, the second part of the phase of writing is the actual writing, chapter one, scene one. And this, of course, and this is just to bear in mind, it's not necessarily that useful, is that it's at this phase of the writing that things can go horribly wrong. And it's also at this phase of the process where you discover that the beautiful, dramatic, exhilarating ideas that you have do not translate into a beautiful, dramatic, exhilarating story, or at least they don't have those qualities in as quite the superabundance you'd hope they would. And I think that everyone, third insight, everyone has this experience of disappointment, of initial disappointment, of thinking, oh my God, I'm just not Shakespeare. But I think that even Shakespeare occasionally thought, oh my God, I wish I was Shakespeare, because no idea translates into the shining city on a hill that we imagined it would be.
And
Josie?
I think that leads very nicely into my next, hopefully, insight, and that is, and this comes up a lot when people contact us, and I want to say, a draft is just a draft. So a lot of people think that, they've dragged their way through a draft and they've written 85,000 words and they think, sure, that's it, it's finished. What I want to say is very few people, if any, would have the sort of first draft that the world is waiting to pounce upon and run with through the publishing houses and the kind of manuscript that people will fight over and offer great sums of money. It just doesn't happen. So, but the other side of that is people often come and say, oh, I've written a draft, so tell me if it's junk and I must throw it in the dustbin. And again, that's got two sides. So a draft, it isn't usually in the kind of state that the world is going to leap for. But equally, it doesn't mean it's worthless. It's a first draft. And most first drafts need to be often put to one side as raw material. Mine usually are that way, because I work my way into the story in the first draft. Then I kind of print it, put it to one side as raw material, and almost start again to restructure, rethink, rework the book, but drawing in material from that awful first draft. And that is the nature of writing, that you write draft after draft after draft. So a first draft is just a draft, and it can be abysmal. As Richard, you don't have to nod your head too vigorously, but as you will attest, that my first drafts are often dreadful. But so that, that is the nature of the beast. If you want to write, yes, when you first allowing the words to pour out of you in a stream, it feels euphoric and brilliant and marvelous. But actually, then comes the real work. The real work comes when it's all poured out of you, and you then have to rework it into something that's got some merit. So what I would say is that if you want to be a writer, almost the most important quality you can have is doggedness and the ability to take advice from people you trust, people who know, not your best friend or your partner who fears for you, but people who are able to look dispassionately at your manuscript, be dogged, be willing to go over and over, but also be willing to take advice and notes from those people. Weep a bit if you want, go home and weep in the bath, but then get out of the bath and consider their notes in a less emotional way, and look at what has merit and what doesn't, and start again. And um, that quote that I can never remember the source of: fail, fail again, fail better.
Beckett, Josie.
Beckett, yes. Right. So as Richard says, it might never become that shining castle on the hill, but you want to work it and work it until you get it as close as you can possibly get it to that shining castle on the hill. Okay, Richard, over to you again.
Okay. All right. So my second insight, it's hardly an insight, it's very crafty, I'm afraid. And that is, um, I think that writers should look for ways in which they can simplify what is a very difficult thing to do. It's a very difficult thing to do, to invent a world, to put it down on paper, to make all the moving parts work, to have things come together at the right points in your story, to have those two climaxes happen at the same time or with just the amount of time between them. I mean, it's really not easy. So if you can give yourself little shortcuts along the way, I think you should snatch at them. And a shortcut that has stood me in very good stead is theft, right? I think that there's nothing wrong with stealing characters, stealing them from real life, or stealing the details of the world that you are creating from the details of your environment. You could, of course, say, no, I'm going to create a world entirely from the material of my imagination. And that's fine. I mean, but I have to just point out that all of the great writers used their observational skills in order to describe things that they were very familiar with. The detail of the daisy on the roadside, the detail of what are those dust things under a bed? I remember years ago in our writing course, one of the exercises, which is still there, is to describe a room that a young woman has just had to occupy because her father has thrown her out of the family home and she's got very little money And the writer is required to show something about her state of mind and what sort of room this is, to use the objective details of the room to tell us something about her internal state. And one person found a detail that I have never forgotten. And it's a funny little detail, but it really is very powerful. Do you remember, have you an acquaintance with the fuzz that forms on the, what would you call it, the furniture of window openings? You know, the brass slide that old-fashioned windows had, and then you would screw it down to hold them in place. That brass slide is covered, if it's been exposed to the elements, with the window being opened, it would be. It's covered with a kind of greasy fuzz. And I thought that detail was just the bee's knees. And she borrowed it. She borrowed it from her experience, right? So, and on a larger scale, I do advise you, as I say, to steal characters, to steal them without shame. The details of their appearance, their their habits, their weaknesses, their strengths, do whatever you like. Because once you've appropriated them in this way and put them into the context of a story that you have invented, although probably with some borrowings as well, those characters will behave differently, in fact, from the real thing. And it'll be difficult for the real people to realize that they have been plagiarized. So that's my second simple piece of advice: steal shamelessly.
Okay. Okay, and now I will give you my third, and I see the questions are coming in. Don't worry, we will get to them. Mine is, it's something that comes up over and over and over again in our mentoring and at retreats. And people say to us, but isn't this boring? Why will people be interested? And it is something that I kind of worried at when I was working on a first draft. I thought, who will be interested in this? It's a small focus story on individual lives. And I want to say that as long as as long as your characters are well drawn and there is jeopardy for your characters, they are in danger. And that doesn't necessarily mean physical jeopardy. If they are emotionally in jeopardy or spiritually in jeopardy, at whatever level, um, we will be interested because we have empathy and because we are human and because it reminds us of our own lives. So you don't need to keep inventing new complexities more and more and more and more to sort of throw into your story to make it more complex, more things happen to them all the time. As long as there is tension and jeopardy and there is things are at stake for your characters, we will be on the edge of our seats and we will be interested. And it doesn't matter whether it's people chasing poachers or getting chased by lions, or whether it's a small focus story on somebody who's in love for the very first time and isn't sure whether the object of her love will love her back. That we are equally interested in that. Or, as I say, a child who wants to send a letter to God because his mother is ill. It's a tiny little snapshot story. It could be a story about a teenage party at which things go incredibly wrong. That would probably be a short story. But as long as we identify and can enter into the feelings of those characters, we will be interested and we will be drawn along. So you don't have to worry about that boredom thing. I think yeah, you don't, yeah, forget it. Don't worry about it. Okay. And Richard, your third.
Okay, now I just wanted to support you in that. Do you remember the Norwegian writer whose name now fails me, but who wrote a 7-volume, um, lightly disguised um, memoir as a novel
Oh,
called My Struggle? Yes, go on, tell me.
Knausgård.
Knausgård. So
God.
Knausgård did this extraordinary thing. I don't know if any of you have read any of the books. I've only read the first one, I have to say. All right. Um, Karen has. Um, he writes about the most ordinary, everyday events that you can imagine. Um, I mean, I remember particularly in volume 1, he writes about a children's party, a small children's party, where nothing goes wrong, actually. Um, and he writes about it for like 20 pages. And I have to tell you that it is fascinating. It's mysteriously fascinating, but we are interested in the details of other people's lives. And there's no getting away from that. Anyway, all right, so I support you, Josie.
Thanks.
All right, so something else that um, I've learned, and I think I've learned it because I didn't know about it. And for many years, over the years that I was earning my writing as my living as a writer, I didn't do any of my own writing at all. And I mean, that is a common phenomenon amongst professional writers who then neglect their own work. But what I wished I'd known was that if I had generated a little momentum, if I had managed to find an hour a day or half an hour a day or 2 hours twice a week, and if I had managed to write to begin with a paragraph and maybe half a page, if I had established that as a habit, I would have generated the kind of momentum that would have given me many more years of writing my own stuff that I didn't. So, I mean, it is so simple. Now, this is a recipe actually also for overcoming writer's block. But it's possible for anyone, including Douglas Adams, who said he just loved the sound of the whoosh of deadlines going by. I think it would work even for him. Write a line of dialogue and then an answering line from somebody in the room with that first person and make it a disagreement between the two of them and let that conversational ball roll between them. I promise you it's not difficult because because you can borrow from life, any day of your life. These things happen. So you write a line of dialogue, an answering piece of dialogue, another bit, and then after a while, ask yourself, where is this happening? And write down a line describing where it is happening. And then imagine what happened immediately before this conversation, because it's now a conversation, got going, and what happens next. And if you want to complicate things, you can have a third person interrupt them. A third person kind of erupts into being in the room, and says, but I disagree with both of you. And then you ask, what do those original two conversationalists do? Do they band up against the third? Or does it all just explode and disappear? The point is, by now, you're well on your way to having a story. And it's at this point you should start doing what I said to begin with. Start thinking about the story. Don't write the story. Think about it. So I wish I
Okay.
had those three things, actually.
Yes. I'm going to launch straight into the first question, which is directed at me. Why is it necessary to do a full rewrite rather than a revision of the original draft? How does one put aside a story and then rewrite it? I'll tell you why I say that. Because for the most part, a first draft is a kind of pouring out of ideas, and it's not necessarily structured in the best possible way. And if you say, okay, I'm going to revise my original draft, the danger is that you're going to move the deck chairs around. You're going to shift the words, change the sentences, say this paragraph sounds better than this paragraph, and I'm going to take out these adjectives, and I'm going to take out this hanging modifier, and possibly I'm going to think of a better metaphor, and maybe I could cut this little bit here or shorten this dialogue. And while all of that may be necessary, certainly for me, that is not necessary at that stage of the process. So I tell you how I go about it. Other people write in different ways. So if you're a very much a planner, you might not need this extent of rewrite that I do, but I'm not a seat of the pants either. I kind of am somewhere in the middle. I know my destiny. I know where I'm going to start. I know the kind of tent poles, the important points of my story, more or less along the way. I know the destination. I know where I want to take my characters to in the end, but I don't know every step along the way. And outpours this outpouring of, scenes and characters and things. So then what I do is at that stage, I print it out. And then I go through it on the printed page, because that it sort of distances me, instead of sitting then getting involved in fiddling with the language on the screen. I'm forced to read the whole thing, and I try and read it in as short a space of time as possible, because I want to get that sense of its flow and its structure and how it works, and where it collapses and plunges into mushiness, and where it gets boring, and I even bore myself. And I scribble little notes all the way through, and I say, cut this is boring, maybe this is where I should begin, maybe I should cut the whole beginning, maybe I should do this, maybe it needs a new shape, maybe it needs to start here. My fourth book, my brother's book, I wrote that first in 3 parts. In fact, its working title was 3 acts. I wrote it in 3 parts. And the first part was quite interesting. The third part was quite interesting. But the second part was just dull, because it didn't have the same kind of jeopardy. And so I took that whole story apart, and I took the middle out, and I wove it I wove parts of it. I cut a great deal away, but I wove parts of that story through part one and part three. So part one and part three stood with this weaving, and that took me a year or a bit longer to do that, because those woven bits had to um, link to what was happening in the other parts. They had to make sense in the shape and the structure. It had to have a shape that could hold one. So that's why I say, then once I've done that, that took me a while to work out what the solution was to the boring middle of that book. And then once I got the idea, I realized it needed a new shape, a new structure. So then that really did. I took that whole thing out, and then I put the thing back together. The manuscript I've been working on now um, has gone through 7 drafts. The second draft and the third draft were the most involved. And I really did go from scratch and use my first draft as raw material. But what I did there was I started at the top. I know it's very inefficient. I started at the top and kept pushing my first draft down. But I had a big marker, first draft, and then I would just go down, find bits, come up, but I certainly rewrote it completely, but drawing pieces of the first draft out. And sometimes actually I made them different colors, bits of the first draft, so that I knew, because I suddenly had in my head a shape and I knew, where I would want bits. And so I made bits of the first draft different colors so that I knew where to find them. But I just pushed it further and further down, right, while I rewrote basically from scratch the second draft. Richard, do you
Can
think
I?
that answers?
Yes, it does. Can I just add a little anecdote to that? And that is,
Yes.
um, I'm not sure if anyone has read Daisy Johnson. Daisy Johnson is a young writer, well, now in her mid-30s, I guess, who, that makes her young, very young, who was the youngest writer ever to be shortlisted for the Booker Prize for her book, Everything Under. And we know somebody who knows her family very well. And Daisy Johnson writes the first draft, and then she puts it aside and she doesn't ever look at it again. And she writes a second draft, which is to say it's not a second draft. It's a new first draft. But it's as if writing her first draft gets things straight in her head. I mean, I would rather die than have to do that. But
I can
because
understand that.
but
But
I can
your first
understand it.
draft,
Yeah.
you remember it, you remember it very closely. So even if you don't refer to it, it's there in your head. You're still
Yes,
referring to it in your
the story is, but not the words. I mean, it would be extremely
times the
unlikely
words.
unless you, yeah, okay, different memories, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Okay.
it's the same point. Yeah.
Yes. Let's.
Okay,
Okay. You
so
can. Yeah.
yeah, Karen said she has been working for a long time on a narrative and it's taking shape, but she is more than ever hesitant to publish. What advice can we give her? Josie, I'm not sure what advice I can give her
All
because I
right.
say
Well,
publishment be damned, you know.
I'll start. I understand the feeling because it is scary. It's scary to have it out there. And there have been times when I have found it so awful that I've said, I'm never doing this again, never doing this again. Now I am doing this again, well, hopefully. But it's because being out there is exposing and vulnerable and frightening. But you have produced something, you have worked on something. So it's like jumping out of an airplane for the first time. It's really scary, and you think, I don't want to do that. But actually, it might be rewarding if you know, hold to your courage and make yourself do it. You know, and people might get things out of it. Yes, so what I'm saying is it's when you're working on a book, it's that lovely warm feeling of having a project that you're busy on, and it gives you joy. Oh, it also makes you struggle, and sometimes you hate it, but generally you have that joy of having a project that is special to you and that means something and that gives you that. I can't really describe it. Sometimes that feeling of being on a higher plane where you think nobody can understand where you are because you feel so different from sort of ordinary mortals, it gives you that high working on a project. But when it's out there, it's another work that people can criticize, they can criticize you, all of that. However, all of that is hard if you're a sensitive and a vulnerable person, and I can be hypersensitive, I can be oversensitive. So I can read a whole positive review and read one negative remark at the end, and that will be the one negative remark that I fixate on and remember for the rest of my life, kind of thing. But there's another side to that, and that is when people come up to you and say, your book meant so much to me. Your book did something for me. I recognized, I identified. Thank you for that book. And that is the other side to that. So, yes, it's hard to put yourself out there, but there are rewards, and it is important when we've worked on a piece of art, hopefully to let other people see it. Richard, do you want to add anything?
No, I don't think I have anything to add. I thought you put it very well. Um,
Thank you.
okay, let's just run through. Um,
It's a question about past and present,
yeah,
and then
well,
there's a
past
comment.
and present, is an endless debate about past and present tense. We seem to be going through a phase in which people are preferring present tense. Josie and I both feel that present tense presents some technical problems that are difficult to handle, believe it or not. Um, and we don't think that it really makes your story any more immediate than the past tense. But, each to his own. And the technical difficulties
There's nothing.
are difficult to describe because they have to do with subjunctive past tense and um, things like if I had been, anyway, I have to think it through before I talk about it. I can't just
And
launch.
also, very few people can maintain it because they then, instead of going into simple past for past, they then go into past perfect, and then it becomes a big mess.
You see, we're
Anyway,
already venturing into territory that
I
is
know,
technical. Yeah.
I know. let's leave that. Okay. Richard,
If
well,
we'd
you can
all had,
probably.
if we'd all had an identical training in grammar, we would be able to have a sensible conversation about it. Yeah.
Okay, so Richard, there are a couple of comments, and then there's one that says, we prefer to read short chapters in larger print, must be the age, but told publishers like long chapters. What is correct?
Well, there's no correct. I
No.
prefer short chapters. Lots of books prefer short chapters. I
Yeah.
think that there's a very, very powerful argument in favor of short chapters. And that is that if you're lying in bed at night and you're reading a book and you come to the end of the chapter and you look briefly ahead to see how long the next chapter is, and it's 37 pages long, you will not start reading it. But if it's 4 pages long, you will read it. And then you look ahead and you see the next one is 3 pages long, you will read it. And before you know it, you will have read 37 pages, but they will come in small pieces of chocolate that are easily digestible. And so
Yeah.
I think that short chapters are more readable than long chapters.
Okay. And then there's a comment which I'll try to summarize from someone who says they would rather poke their eyeballs out than rewrite like I do. But they are an OCD plotter um, who and work out a very thorough outline based on the 3-act structure, and having that incredibly elaborate outline next to them, they don't miss beats, and it's that works for them. And that's fantastic. That's a person who
Okay,
is
let me
um,
chip in.
yeah, yes, do.
Okay, so my background, professional writing background, has been in film and television. And in film and television, um, everything is planned. Every script is designed in advance, and then you write it. Um, and it's frequently designed by somebody else. All right. If you're writing a long form drama where there are many, many episodes, for instance, a soap, then there's a writing room where the people design the stories and they then present these synopses to the writers who turn them into scripts that can be shot with dialogue and stage directions and so on. So my experience has always been to design the story before I begin and then to write it. And so my inclination is still to do exactly, Mandy, what you describe yourself doing. The problem is with that is that you've got to get it right, which is why I say spend time on thinking about your story. It's really about thinking about the structure of your story as much as anything else. If you get it right, then I think this is the perfect way of writing a story. And you will end up with a story that doesn't need 7 drafts.
Yeah,
But the time goes in
but
at the start, right? Um,
the time goes in at the beginning, or somewhere along the line. I like working the way I work because I find that I get ideas along the way, and then it
well, that is
helps me develop.
that's exactly the problem with the over-designed story, and that is that you do come up with wonderful ideas while you're writing, and you realize if I incorporate these ideas, I'm going to throw out the plan going forward completely. And that can be a big problem because then
Yeah,
you have to stop and redesign. I don't know, Mandy, if you experience that. Um, you can make a note
yeah.
to one effect
It
or the other.
it depends what works for you. So um, Yeah. Okay, so
Okay,
Richard,
so
here's
I'm looking at,
Cherise said she loves what you said
yes,
about thinking about.
yes. She says, I find that I have always had an overactive imagination. My struggle is fixating on making it perfect. I'm far too critical of my own work sometimes. What are some ways to combat your inner critic, especially if the inner critic is preventing you from seeing the value of what you've written? I mean, I think there are a number of tactics for dealing with an inner critic. Josie has just fallen out of our universe. I hope she returns. Um, one way um, is to is to set is to write without paying attention to the critic, if you possibly can, and to promise yourself that you will give your inner critic her time in the sun when you've finished, and then to set your story aside for a few weeks, a good few weeks, before you get back to it. Because when you go back to a story that you've written a little bit in the past, where you've had a chance to disengage yourself slightly, natural disengagement will take place from the story. Um, and the inner critic won't be as active. And you will find that that inner critic will say things like, oh gosh, this is better than I thought. Or this dialogue is very nice. And this scene, gosh, did I write that? And that sort of thing does happen, but you've got to give it a chance to settle and to marinate for a little while. Otherwise, what is your inner critic? I mean, I'm now busking. I don't have an answer to this. Um, your inner critic is obviously you, right? It's one aspect of yourself. I suspect, it's the self-conscious aspect of yourself. Um, it's the bit of yourself that, well, it's it's a judge and possibly the jury as well and the executioner, but um, self-consciousness is the real demon here. And Josie, are you back yet?
I'm back. I'm back. Sorry. I don't know what
Okay.
happened. I
What
just
what do
fell
you say
out.
about self-consciousness? What do you say about self-consciousness and
I,
how to
you know,
come?
it's a difficult, yeah, it's a difficult one because I have a tendency to self-consciousness and I have to fight against it. So I almost see them as gargoyles and gremlins. Um, you know, those parts of oneself or the imagined response of other people. I sometimes think, oh my God, imagine so and so reading this work, and you have to hit them in the face and knock them off your shoulders. And you have to, I often say, you have to change heads when you're writing and when you are rewriting or revising, not just a hat, but a head, because you need a loving head when you're writing, but you need the head of a kind stranger when you are revising. Not an enemy, a kind stranger. But when you are writing, you have to try to just think, what would I like? What do I like? And and you have to focus on that and allow the kind parts of yourself to, you know, to decide what they enjoy reading. But it's, I mean, it's not an exact science. It's not that easy.
Um, Dorian asks a question about a
Mm.
book that he has written. Um, about HIV, and he worries about the confidentiality aspect of revealing details about real people in the real world. And that is, what do you do about that? What do you do about that? I suppose there are a lot of things you can do about it. You can ask them whether they mind. You can give them the right to say no. You can disguise them, but the disguises have to be good. They can't just be a simple name change if you retain the fact that they have um, a carrot top of red hair. You know, you have to. Josie's disappeared again. You have to be very careful about identifying people in a book that does revolve around um, intimate personal details. We know people who have written books like this, not on this subject, who have put it away and intend to wait until at least one person has died before they think of publishing it. So it's a tricky one. Mandy has some good advice. I would recommend writers check out the top 100 Amazon books in their genre and then decide whether to go past or present tense or first or third person POV. She likes to stay abreast of the market trends in her own genre. Good
Yeah,
advice. That's good
I think
advice.
that's very true, because I think there are genres where present tense is used a lot more, and yeah, and third and first person. Quite right.
Ivan says, if I reread my book and my friends have read it and none of us find it boring or needing restructuring, what would there be to rewrite? Lucky man.
I think you should also sometimes think of asking people to read it who are not your friends.
Yeah. Your friends are
Just as a,
obliged to like the work. Um, yeah.
yeah. Richard, having fallen out, I can't seem to see the chats anymore. So
Yes,
if you
I'm
can go,
running through it.
yeah,
I'm running through it.
good.
Um, yes, Bonnie says, quite right. Your book might be riveting, but remember, friends, family are kind.
Yeah.
Um, what else do we have here? Um, okay, so uh, I think that more or less covers what we've got in the chat room.
Well,
I think that's fine because
well,
we're coming up for the
yeah.
witching
w-
hour.
Yes. And we can tell you a little bit about um, next year, I guess.
Yeah, next
Um,
year there will be 12 free webinars. Okay,
yes.
yippee.
Yeah, yes, yippee. And there will be every Monday a Monday motivation from Richard to keep you writing. And
Yep.
every month there will be a newsletter from me, which tells you, hopefully gives you a few little skills, but also tells you what we're doing and what we're offering. So that's, yeah. And we have lots of resources, free resources. And on our website, what some of our things are not free, but do have a lot of value, we think. So the first thing to say is that our creative writing course is online, and it's designed to give you all the writing skills you need to be able to write a novel or a literary, a narrative non-fiction book. So, and we give feedback on every single module. So that's our creative writing course. Richard, do you want to talk briefly about mentoring?
Yeah, so we have a platoon of people who are in the midst of writing books. They are writing books that they might have been working on for years already. They are some of them are on the initial stages of that, and we basically hold their hands while they write, giving them feedback, detailed forensic feedback. I do like that word. Um, as they go, we provide our services to help brainstorm, one of my great passions in life, um, brainstorm their stories, um, consider problems that they're facing, helping provide answers to them. Having the mentoring people are also part of the mentoring community. All of the people doing mentoring have access to each other's work and are free to read it and join in discussions once a month, at which we help individual writers. So mentoring is we think like a very valuable process. I wish I'd had a mentor when I began.
And then we have our retreats. So Joanne Hitchens and I do the memoir workshop weekend in Barrydale in May, and that is followed by a week's retreat where everybody will get an hour of one-on-one time every day from one of us, and you don't have to be a memoir writer to join that retreat. After the workshop, anyone can join that retreat. And then Richard, say a word or two about Stowe.
Okay, so I run a small weekend workshop in Stowe on the Wold in the Cotswolds, where Liza Sears lives. She's on the screen at the moment. Hello, Liza. And yeah, it's very small. There's only room for a handful of people, but it is always great. In June is when it
In
happens.
June, yes. And then, of course, there is the fabulous Venice. Now, Venice this year, within 3 weeks, I think, of ending this year's Venice retreat, we had basically filled the 2 weeks of next year. We had, I think, 2 places left in the second week, and that was it. So we have taken the scary leap of opening a third week. So there, if you know, you can come for 1 week, or if there's still those couple of places free in the second week. So if you're keen on 2 weeks, you can come in the second and third weeks of Venice, and that will be in November. All the tourists have gone home. It's lovely. It's
Not
really
quite.
lovely.
She exaggerates.
Most of them.
The tourists never go home. Yeah. I can see a time
Yeah.
when the Venice retreat will run from January to January.
So,
All
but
right.
do speak, because it does tend to fill up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great fun. I mean, it really is
Yeah.
memorable. We
Yeah.
are very lucky.
Yeah. We are lucky.
This coming year will be our 10th Venice retreat. Yeah.
Yes. And we are lucky to work with you guys. We really are, because I think people who write are very special. So it means that, you know, the people who come, if you're thinking of humming and hawing about coming, generally the people you will be there with will be just lovely, because writing people are.
We live on, as Josie said earlier, we live on a higher plane, you know.
Yes. Thank you all for joining us this evening. And thank you I have been noticing the nice things you've been saying on the chat